Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Jerry, go ahead and test your mic there.
Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. You guys are going to be over by that. Testing.
Yeah. I'm going to speak into this one here just to moderate, but Jerry will be using that mic.
Jerry, can you? Yeah, testing 1, 2. Testing. Testing. You okay? Testing 1, 2.
On that one, I am, yeah.
Testing 1, 2. That's the most important one, I can tell you that much.
We could debate that.
What's that?
We can debate that.
This is where all the mics are, so I think this is
I told Lauren earlier, I said, you know, you ever see those Liberty Mutual commercials? You know, Doug or whatever his name is, you know, and all that stuff. He gives them one, he gives a press conference. He's got multiple mics, and he's so dumb that he speaks. He's like, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's news conference. I'd like to welcome everyone. You know, he says Deej mic, you know.
You guys are getting this one okay?
All line.
Josh, I'm going to look at you for a thumbs up, okay? That you're ready to go.
Yeah, testing 1, 2, 3. Testing. Testing.
Probably
1,
about 2 minutes.
3, 4. Testing. Testing. 1, 2. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Check. 1, 2, 3, 4.
It's the guy, that one. Yeah, that's going to be the main one. That's who I'm going to look at, basically. All the others are just TV stations around the city.
Okay.
Yeah. Sean? No music? Okay. We'll get started here in just about 30 seconds. All right, guys, come on in. You guys can stand over kind of by the back.
They don't want to be.
Ready to go? Yeah. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Just I'd like to welcome everyone to the Ohio High School Athletic Association. We'd like to thank all of those who are watching at home, especially our school administrators and coaches and parents and student athletes. I'd certainly like to welcome all the media who are here today with us, and we do apologize. We had to keep this media number small to stay within the CDC meeting limits, so we apologize to those who could not be here today, but thanks for watching at home. I'd like to thank our video partner today, ICRC from Cincinnati, that's supplying the video feed, and also our partner at Boxcast that is helping us deliver this to our online audience. Every day at 2 o'clock, our staff, just like many of you and many of you watching at home, watch the daily updates from Governor DeWine, Lieutenant Governor Husted, and Dr. Amy Acton. In fact, we watch many of those from this room. And we appreciate their leadership, and we appreciate all the information that they are giving, and especially as it pertains to our member schools. Here's the format for today's press conference. In just a minute, I'll introduce our OHSAA folks who are here with us today, and then I'll turn it over to OHSAA Executive Director Jerry Snodgrass. And we'll discuss the postponed winter tournaments and also the status of the upcoming spring tournaments. After Jerry makes his opening comments, we'll go through 8 or 9 of the most common questions that have been submitted by our member schools. And Jerry will respond to those, and then we will turn it over to our media questions, and Mr. Goldring has our microphone. I'll call on you by name if you have a question, and we'll have you speak into the microphone so that our online audience can hear the question as well. And then Jerry will wrap it up. So you know who is up here today. We have several of our sport administrators who were able to be here today, not all of them, but some of them. And not only with Jerry, but also our sport administrators speak directly with our schools and coaches every day. We have Roxanne Price as our tennis administrator. Fremont Little Giant, as always, reminds us. Bo Rugg, Pride of Newark, is our lacrosse sport administrator and also our football sport administrator. There's lots of football questions right now as well. Lauren Prohaska, hero of Plain City, Jonathan Alder, is our softball administrator, and Dale Gabor from Cleveland St. Ignatius High School is our track and field administrator. So thank you for being here today. Several of our administrators could not be here for various reasons, but I know that they're watching at home. At this time, we'll turn it over to Executive Director Jerry Snodgrass.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to the audience that's watching on this as well. And I really commend you for helping disseminate information that's critical to what is so important in the lives of our student athletes. I would also want to take the time, too, to mention that I commend our staff for being such forward thinkers. Starting when the virus hit the United States, our staff started planning for all of the what-ifs, and I commend them for being not only here today, but all the work that they've done behind the scenes that probably will become one of the better untold stories of this organization. But certainly, as everyone knows by now, the situations surrounding the COVID-19 virus and its effect on everyone's daily lives is something most in our generation have never dealt with before. The effects on students, both from a physical and mental standpoint, are something that are an incredible impact that we and teachers and educators across the nation are left to deal with. One thing that this crisis has brought out is how important schools and school activities are in the lives of students, the communities, parents, and fans. That's something that does not go unnoticed at all. And when there are good things that arise out of a crisis, certainly that is one of those that will force all of us in the educational business to really focus on how to get this back to a normalcy. No one involved in education underestimates the importance of that. And every organization exists to provide opportunities to students through athletics. And I think one of the most important things to understand for everyone is though we are in the athletic business, that is what we do on a daily basis. It's more important to understand, and now more than ever, that we're in the education business. that we in high school sports, school-based sports, we are an extension of the classroom. We're not the classroom itself. And I think sometimes in today's world where sports dominate so much, people put high school sports on a pedestal that think it's separate from the educational world. And it's very important that our viewers, our students, our coaches, everyone understand that we, again, are an extension of the classroom. The decision by Governor DeWine last week, just a week ago, to close down classrooms to help increase social distancing was certainly not made lightly. Our decision, my decision to postpone tournaments at that time, the events that were going on, certainly was not made lightly either. The feedback that we have gotten from schools, from parents, from students, everyone has never been taken lightly. However, yesterday, the governor stated in his address yesterday that it is here, referring to the COVID-19 virus. It is here, and we must be at war with it. And we have a duty, and I have a duty, and the responsibility to help with that war, to fight it. And we are going to do that. And over the past 10 days, you know, I've learned from students, I've heard from so many that talk about how important a softball game, how important a track meet, how important, you know, competing for that state title in hockey, that wrestler who worked so hard to get to the state tournament, how important that is in their lives. None of us, our staff, myself, will never, ever underestimate that. I'm a parent. I was a teacher. I was a coach. I was an administrator. I think I understand that as well as anyone, and our staff buys into that as well. So all decisions are not going to be made upon emotions. We take them into consideration and we understand them, but we have to make the best judgments we can make based upon fighting that war, as the governor had indicated. So, you know, what we did starting a week ago, we became very aggressive in our fight. We instituted immediately a 3-week no contact period for our coaches. I want to emphasize, and I think the viewership right now should understand this, that while that no contact period was put in place, it was put in place so we could control that social distancing, that we could help with not getting kids together. We identified we didn't want captains' practices. We did not want voluntary practices, workouts that we want you to get together on your own. We really tried to address that because we thought it was important. We do, however, promote the constant contact with our student athletes via electronic communications. That's important. We've already identified that coaches play such an important role in the lives of our student athletes. They need that mental support. And I think that's something that we continue to stress and will continue to stress. As we know, too, that our tournaments focus on a winner. But we focus more as a staff and this organization on the experience that we provide. And while the window of opportunity for our winter tournaments is closing rapidly, we still remain that they are on a indefinite postponement. We do that for a simple reason. While again the window is closing, we also realize that there are so many other factors that people do not realize. Site availability, coaches availability, the keeping in mind that our officials, there are people that are in the risk category that we cannot and will not subject to being faced with being infected by this virus. So there are many factors with this. Much of this hinges on future decisions by the governor on whether we close schools for a longer period of time. Extending our tournaments into the summer months, extending them even into May, is very problematic on a lot of different fronts. I don't expect every parent, every fan to understand all the reasons why, but nor will I put our schools or our venues or sites at risk to explain all of that. Most of us have seen now that so many facilities have closed through, I believe, even early June. That does become problematic. I do not want to put a school in a spot of saying, we will host a tournament, when I'm not sure they're speaking for all of the right people for that. So there are a lot of factors that enter in to when, how, and why we may end up having to cancel our winter tournaments. I was asked last Thursday if canceling was on the table. Canceling is on the table. Everything is on the table. I would be remiss if I did not say that. So that is a factor. Right now, the governor has closed schools for 3 weeks with a return date temporarily set right now as, I believe, April 6th. We put a plan in place last Thursday. We disseminated it to our schools on Friday of a tentative schedule for our spring sports. And with schools being out again as of this moment, with schools being out until April 6th when they return, we put a plan together that would include a period of time where we would like practices to begin before they have their first contests, and our state tournament still staying on the same schedule. However, what will change that overnight will be any decision by the governor to extend the closure of schools. And again, it doesn't mean that at this point with spring sports that we are canceling, but is canceling on the table? It absolutely has to be on the table. Again, I would be remiss if I did not say that. The government nor the OHSAA nor school districts are denying the opportunities for these kids. I want to make that clear. We are not, the government is not, Governor DeWine is not, other organizations or school districts. By them closing their athletic facilities right now for students, they're not the ones that are eliminating these opportunities or putting these opportunities on hold. It's a severe virus that we must, as the governor said, go to war with and defeat. And for that reason, that is why right now that we continue with the postponement of our winter sports and a tentative schedule going forward with our spring sports. We will always consult, which we have so far, and I think this does need to be clear. We will consult with our schools, our member schools, first before we make any public decision to do cancellation, whether we cancel or extend postponements. I think our schools entrust us to do that, and we owe our member schools that responsibility to make sure we communicate with them first.
Jerry, thank you. So we'll turn it over now to 8 or 9 questions that our schools have submitted. The most common one, and obviously the one that's on the front burner, is the postponed winter sports, wrestling, girls and boys basketball, and ice hockey. Could there be a scenario where 1 or 2 of those winter sports are able to still be contested, but not another winter sport, or just the winter sport specifically?
Of all the what-ifs that we talked about early on, we played that scenario out with our sport administrators. And we had varying opinions originally on that, and I had a certain opinion on that. But as time has gone on, the controlling factors of this with venue availability, official availability, probably would be overriding factors that all would, if cancellation is required, they most likely all would be canceled. I highly doubt that we would play one without the other.
And the follow-up to that is particularly for wrestling, just the complexity of that sport with the weights of the wrestlers and those things. Is wrestling the most complicated one of the winter sports?
Wrestling right now, and I think many of our viewers know this, has, I believe, 621 wrestlers and 300 schools that are part of the state tournament. So moving a sport like that, you know, everything from the suggestion of splitting it up to different sites, it's very difficult with the number of weight classes to get down to the minimum of, I believe it's the recommendation by the CDC of no more than 10. It almost becomes impossible to do that. And again, I emphasize with every comment that it does not negate the emotional feeling that we all have relative to those wrestlers who have done so much. Weight management is a huge issue for wrestlers, asking them to maintain that during this time where they really technically have no workout facilities. And to assume that everyone has the opportunity in their home or even in their driveway to stay in shape and keep their weight down, keep within the weight guidelines, is probably not possible. So I think when you combine that with everything else, the decision will be forthcoming soon, but will be tied into the other sports as well.
Jerry, as our girls basketball state tournament and our boys regional basketball state tournament, boys regional tournament was getting ready to get started, there were some college basketball tournaments that proceeded for a short period of time with no fans, just the players, officials, and coaches. We decided not to do that at the OHSAA. Just talk about that a little bit.
You know, for one, I believe that, we all have a feeling that this only affects, or the high-risk category is, I think it's now been lowered to 60 plus. And I did see in the Columbus News this morning that I think it was a 4-year-old maybe was diagnosed, a 2-year-old was diagnosed. This is not, I mean, if it's 1 2-year-old, I cannot put kids at risk for this. And we're seeing more and more basketball players who have come in contact who have now been diagnosed. Our officials, as I mentioned, not all of our officials, and I know you could say, well, we could get a 20-year-old to officiate our games. That's just not that possible. So having it's very difficult with scorekeepers, auxiliary people that are necessary to run an event. And I know I have suggestions all the time that, my mom or my dad will do it or my brother will do it. It just is not possible to do that and maintain the fairness of the event that we put on.
Yesterday, Governor DeWine said that, I think he used the word obviously, that the 3-week school facility closure would be extended. Is that what the OHSAA is waiting for to make any further decisions about the winter or spring tournaments?
It is one of the overriding factors for us. Most know, and we just turned the clock back just a little over a week ago when the governor announced on Tuesday that he recommended to the OHSAA, he recommended to me on the phone with Dr. Acton and State Superintendent of Schools on the same call, that he recommended that we continue the events at that time with only, at the time he said, only parents. We heeded that recommendation, which I think was the wisest thing to do, but I didn't do it just because he recommended it. That I've had the freedom to go against that, yes. However, why I mention that is that it isn't just that I'm waiting on what he might say, but if it's becoming so obvious, I'm not going to blame this on the governor. We will make our recommendations. It is a factor, yes, but, and obviously if he does do it, it becomes imperative. We have no choice, but given constant contact with them, it will be a factor.
One of the debates right now at the college level is, will winter or spring athletes receive another year of eligibility? They're discussing that at the college level. Are we discussing it at the high school level?
We are not. Giving student athletes in high schools an extra year of eligibility becomes more problematic than any other level. We don't redshirt. We don't do all the things that, I'm not sure how many students would like to stay in high school for another year anyhow, but believe it or not, that has been brought up to us. But I will extend that a little bit to simply say, again, I'm proud of our administrative team here at the OHSAA, because starting last week, when we faced the reality that schools would be closed, we started discussing about what impact that would have on eligibility academically, not year-wise, but what impact that would have on our student athletes. And we are working on a plan for that right now, especially if schools do close for the remainder of the year, because some schools have finished their third grading period, some have not. So we are working on that right now, and again, with job assignments internally for us, our compliance team is working on that, and we'll have answers to that very soon, again, should schools close.
Jerry, you touched a little bit on the current no contact period that our school coaches have with their student athletes. Just to reiterate what a coach can and cannot do right now.
Yeah, we put the no contact period in immediately simply to discourage the people from getting together and complying with the governor, the president, and the CDC's recommendations to increase social distancing. And we did that more than anything else. But again, we also try to understand the importance of a coach and the mental well-being of our student athletes. And as a result of that, we are really encouraging giving them workouts via phone, via teleconferencing, Skype, FaceTiming, whatever it might be. But again, we put those in place so we would really discourage any social gathering. It's important to understand too that we can regulate our school events. We can regulate what our student athletes and our coaches can do. We cannot regulate what the non-school activities, we tend to call it AAU in basketball. It's not, very little of it is actually AAU, but the club travel world, we have no authority over that. One of the concerns I had in its early going was the second that we made the decision to implement the no contact period for that 3-week period of time, instantly people were developing all these club travel programs so kids could gravitate to it right away. So we enforced many of our non-interscholastic rules, our out-of-season rules, so we could help with that. We even had one site, I looked it up the very next day, it was called Corona Baseball. Corona Baseball. And it was developing a league for all these high school kids to get together and play, which totally contradicts the CDC's recommendations. They even used our logo. And very problematic for us. And it's not about the kids, again, it's not about denying kids the opportunities. It's about attacking this virus the way that we need to do it.
And during this time, are we encouraging student athletes to work out on their own at home?
We absolutely are. It's amazing if you follow, I follow a lot on social media and the different things that people are putting out there to help with kids. I made a suggestion the other day. I mentioned that I was a coach in my previous life. And I remember the days where gyms were not allowed to be open. I remember the days when coaches were not permitted to coach outside the season at all and give any instruction. Now today, student athletes are bigger, faster, and stronger. So yes, they are better. But at the same time, I learned a lot of my basketball at Rife's Barn on Old Route 30 between Upper Sandusky and Winford. Now I got a lot of criticism for putting that out there that, oh no, coaches do so much more today and that's why they're better. And I agree they do. I definitely agree they do. But it also wasn't all that bad then either that student athletes learn to do things on their own. So we do encourage them to give workouts to their kids. And you know what? They can do it on their own at that point in time.
2 more questions from our schools, and then we'll turn it over to the media. The first one is, if spring sports do not happen, what would be our process for determining eligibility for the fall sports?
That is an issue that we are looking at. And again, I mentioned it, that one of the challenges with that is not everybody is on the same school start schedule. And you can kind of work back on this, that it really all depends if schools ended their semester break at Christmas time or not. If they didn't end their semesters at Christmas time, then that means they're about probably 2 weeks away right now from finishing their 3rd quarter. Those that did finish their semester break at Christmas time have already ended their 3rd quarter. So our grading, our eligibility requirements go back to the point of how many courses. It all depends upon their previous grading period's grades. We require students to pass 5 credit courses. But again, it's on the previous grading period. Where that is an issue is going into the fall, the previous grading period is the last quarter of the spring. Summer school grades do not count for that. So we have to, and our compliance team, and Roxanne Price is here on that, is working on that diligently to make sure that we have those options. Certainly someone brought out to me to make every kid eligible in the fall. That's on the table, there's no question, but we're not ready. They're working on it, but we're not ready to release that yet until we see what happens with the rest of the school year.
Okay, last question from our schools, then we'll turn it over to the media. If we get to the point where our winter tournaments cannot be completed, we announce that they cannot go on, and even for the spring, at what point, and is it at that point when students can begin competing with their non-school team?
That's a very interesting question because we could instantly open it up, and it's hard to answer that on a yes or no. But we also have a responsibility, I believe, to help fighting this pandemic. And the more restrictions that we put on that they cannot compete with these other groups that are unregulated, the more control we have on them. However, we also run into the realities of things in enforcement. Roxanne Price and our compliance team also works with our enforcement. And it's very, very difficult we have roughly 350,000 student athletes. I don't know how many exactly in the spring, but it becomes very difficult to enforce those types of rules across the board for so many student athletes. So I should mention, we have a staff meeting every single morning that we talk about these different topics. So we will have clarity on that very soon as well.
We just had one question come in that we're going to ask here. It might come up from the media too, but the one that actually didn't come in from the schools yet, but it's one we've talked about, and that is the financial impact of all this on the OHSAA.
Good question. I think without question, there's a huge financial impact on this organization. And we have a separate team that's working on not only the impact of it, but how we're going to deal with it. I think it's twofold. I found it amazing when somebody said that when we postponed the winter tournaments, that was all about the money. I didn't quite process that. It was all about the money. We'd probably go on and have them no matter what. But just through the winter sports, we most likely, at our best first estimates, we will lose in the neighborhood of about 1.4 to 1.5 million just on revenues from the tournaments of the winter sports. That's out of a $19 million total budget. And I think people sometimes don't realize we are a business. We're the educational business, but we do not rely on tax dollars. And I think a lot of people do not realize that. We are a nonprofit organization, and 80% of our revenues, 80% are generated from ticket sales. So down 1.4 to 1.5 million alone just on the winter tournaments. And I believe, I can't remember the number that was told to me yesterday, but it was significantly a great deal on the spring sports if we lose those as well. But I do want to emphasize, when we start looking at how to deal with that, we are going to make certain that the services that we provide to kids and the opportunities that we provide through athletics is at the forefront of what we will maintain.
Thank you, Jerry. Well, we're going to turn it over to some questions from the media. At probably the advice of Dr. Acton, we're not going to pass around the microphone. Bob Goldring has the microphone. If you just want to put your hand up, if you have a question to Bob, will come to you. Okay. Justin over here.
Hey, Jerry. You're almost playing the role of Grim Reaper here the last 3 weeks. Is there a hesitation to become the Grim Reaper yourself, just to wait on what Governor DeWine, because, I mean, you add up all these factors, and you've used the word inevitable. Where's that hesitation lie? We're just making it a closure for everybody.
Yeah, and it's not a hesitation because I fear making it. I think that's the important thing, is that I challenged our staff every single day, did it again this morning, of look at every single possible opportunity. I often talk about throwing ideas against the wall. Some of them are almost laughable sometimes when we think about it. But the other part of it is maybe something sticks that we can do. One of the important things I have stated is do not let our regulations and our bylaws, I've stated this repeatedly, don't let them box us in on what we're able to do. Think creatively, and if there's something we can do, and that's the only thing I'm holding on to right now, is that if it is inevitable, is there something creative that we can do to give the respect to the kids that have put in those efforts.
Seth here in the middle. Or we'll go to Seth right here and then Jack.
Oh, sorry. The CDC says about 50 or less for 8 weeks. You look at a calendar, that puts you at about May 10th from where they announced it. Does that mean, I mean, baseball and softball you could probably do with no fans, but a track meet with 50 people or less seems awful difficult, talking about an invite especially.
We also, you're right, and we also deal, people forget that we also deal with the logistics of events. How do you how do you assert that those no more than 50, no more than whatever it is, gets into an event? You know, I mean, those are factors that all enter into it. Do people want to take that responsibility to control that? I go back a week on Tuesday when we were recommended by the governor to shut down with only parents. In a matter of less than 24 hours at that time, less than 24 hours, we were able to return tens of thousands of dollars of pre-sold ticket monies for our regional tournaments, our state tournaments, and semifinal games, and also institute a plan that we had prepared that only the required people, it was to be parents, but we couldn't ID parents, were able to get into those games. And though games ended up being canceled at the moment, we were able to still go forward doing that with some of our regional games. It worked flawlessly, but how we have the logistics of trying to deal with that, let alone site availabilities to do it. So those factors are critical, and again, beyond the emotions of what kids, you know, sometimes think, and coaches.
We'll go to Jack from Dayton WDTN.
Yeah, you had mentioned the window is rapidly closing concerning the winter sports. Do you have a date that you're looking at circled on the calendar? And beyond that, do you have much hope that this can get done?
You know, to not be, you know, not to procrastinate that at all. I think that's important, and that's really what I don't want to do. In today's staff meeting, I ask our staff to bring to me tomorrow. When I say bring to me, we are working remotely. I should remind people of that. But we're working our normal hours and getting things done, is to bring to me every single factor of how we can continue or not continue. And I anticipate, and again, daily, depending upon the governor too, of course, we will be making that decision for winter sports probably within the next 24 to 48 hours. We have to. I think it's imperative that we have to and cannot procrastinate. I do not want to lead people on. That's the number one thing I don't want to do, and give them false hope.
Let's go to Scott Springer from the Cincinnati Enquirer.
With the winter sports looking bleak, to be honest, wrestling's kind of a different animal, but basketball, for instance, would you declare pole champions, or is this just a year without a champion?
Most likely, we have not discussed that part of it, although I will say this, one of the things we talked about was looking at all these different creative ways how we recognize. I think one of the TV shows, last night I think, one of the ESPN shows I think have a senior night or something like that. I didn't catch it, but that they actually recognized one of Ohio's teams. It was St. Ignatius Ice Hockey. I think they were doing it with the assumption that all tournaments across the nation are probably done, but we've discussed remotely that, but I personally, for example, somebody reached out to me and said, would you just declare all 16, I think it is, teams in girls basketball as champions? I'm not into that. I'm not. I will run it by staff first, but I don't have that kind of intention. I'd have to look at the pole champion thing to see, you know, I don't know. I'm not really prepared to answer that, but it's a good question.
Let's go to Clay Hall over here.
Mr. Snodgrass, are we going to then convene here in 24 to 48 hours for an announcement on winter sports?
If that decision is made by then. And if that decision is made by then, and if it is, after I consult with our schools.
But that's at the cue of the governor.
Part of it is, yes. Part of it is. But if I see that that window is completely closed from the stuff that we talk about in our staff meetings, then I may do it without the governor's. I may do it without the governor.
So today we're still indefinitely
Correct.
postponed.
Correct.
But in 2 days we could be
We
done.
could very well be.
Hey, Bob, let's come up here to Steve Blackledge from the Dispatch, and then to Sean.
Jerry, how feasible would it be if this thread ends by May to pick up the spring sports season, say at the tournament time? And how feasible would it be to even to push things back into middle to late June?
And that's one of the reasons why for spring sports we've held on to that. Even I would tell you right now, even if the extension of school closures is a week, we still have room. We still have room. But again, why I'm saying this with a little hesitancy is there are so many school programs, whether it's school testing, Right now, schools are, again, I think there'll have to be an adjustment to this, but school requirements are to be in school 1,001 hours, I believe it is, for the school year. I don't know if schools, we don't know if schools were to open back up, will the ODE require schools to be open for longer periods of time during the day? That could have a huge impact on extracurricular activities. So I've kept that window open for spring sports because of the number of what ifs. Could we? Yeah, we could probably extend to, right now our state baseball tournament, I think, is June 11th, 12th, somewhere in there. And so we have a little bit of wiggle room to move that. But again, we're talking about site availability too. And our sport administrators are already in consultation with the different site venues that we use.
We'll go to Sean Dunnigan from WBNS-TV.
You mentioned the site locations. Have you talked to any other sites or venues that may want to hold this if the original site would not be able to hold any of these games or tournaments?
At this time, I can't answer that. That would be up to our sport administrators, and again, part of our daily discussions. But I know that in some cases, we're pretty familiar with those that have already shut down into June. So I guess it's like so many things. If somebody shut down, if a major facility is shut down, I believe one in Cincinnati, I'm not sure, might have been UC Arena, I'm not sure which one, said they were closed through early June or something like that, but that kind of has a ripple effect on many other sites too.
We'll go to Jared Ullery from Columbus This Week.
If the governor were to say in the next few days, for example, students could return to school maybe in early May, could you see a scenario where the winter tournaments could be resumed maybe in like mid-May?
Off the top of my head, I would say probably not. And I know that upsets many people, but again, there are so many factors. Keeping in mind what we differ from in so many other levels of sport, we have many of our kids that play multiple sports. And the impact of that impacts spring sports if they could continue. I doubt it. I doubt it. And again, I know that's not a popular decision, but that's a decision that I would shoulder that responsibility for.
Speaking of the governor, so right before we started, Governor DeWine said that he has a teleconference with the president here soon, and his next update is today at 2:30. So we'll all be watching that too.
Right.
Any other questions here? Scott Springer again from Inquirer.
I know the facilities are shut down and you encourage kids to practice and all that. Obviously, they can't get indoors. How do you stop somebody from going to like a track? Because, you know, there's Grandpa Jones down the street that walks on the track every day. Is that up to the schools to decide, well, these are school kids, or this is just, because the argument will be, well, we're taxpayers, this is our track, let us walk on it and all that. I don't know that there's an answer, but it seems like it's a difficult thing to enforce.
Many of our school districts have facilities, essentially track is the main one, who they do open them to the community. You got to remember that so many of these places, communities, not just through tax dollars, but also through private donations, you know, have contributed to upgrade those facilities, and they are open to the public for that reason. That highlights how we've reached out to our schools and asked them for help. Last week when we put in the no contact period, we also required a shutdown of facilities that are used for athletic reasons. We had to quickly answer that with the tracks. I'm not saying we didn't think about that, but probably kind of went by the wayside. We were talking more about weight rooms for kids and gyms and things like that, but that we can't shut that down. But I also want to stress something else, that we have asked yesterday in a communication with our schools, which we have been in constant contact with. I reached out to our schools yesterday and I asked, I wanted their help. And I wanted their help to pull their coaches together, not physically, but through communication, and have our coaches do what they do best, and that is lead. I've said repeatedly since taking this job that what we do in athletics and what coaches do is much more than winning contests. And now highlights that more than ever, that our coaches talk to their kids and get them to understand the importance of the bigger fight of this. I understand the importance of softball in a girl's life. I understand the importance of a track meet, a wrestler, a physically demanding sport. We understand that, but it's really time for our coaches to do what they do best, and that is to be leaders. And we have had several of our allied coaches associations reach out and communicate with our sport administrators, and myself included, and they have emphasized that fact. And I applaud them for doing that, of being the leaders that we think they are and should be. So again, a long-winded story there of, shutting down tracks, but we cannot do that, and we've heard that. I think some schools are doing it anyhow because they really can't regulate how many are on that track. So again, we rely on our schools for a lot of self-enforcement.
Dave Jablonski here from Dayton Daily News.
I'm sure you're mostly talking to coaches and administrators, but how much have the students reached out to you personally, either on Twitter or email during this time to, plead their case maybe for playing again?
A lot, a lot. I certainly, I know the emotion that goes with it. I keep stressing that. I do. When I was coaching, I went to the gym every single day with one goal in mind, and that was to get to the state tournament. That's being denied, and I get that. But I'll emphasize again, it's being denied by something bigger than all of us. I have at least one athlete right here, an employee that played in a state tournament, that understands the significance of it, and we're fortunate we do have that here. But yes, they've reached out. They've really reached out. One told me they hold me personally responsible for that experience, and I did reply. And I hope they do. I hope they hold me personally responsible that I've done my part in this organization's part in getting athletics back. And I think that's important. And I also want to say that we will come back. Athletics will come back. School athletics will come back. And now more than ever, we need to be unified from our schools and from our coaches to get them back. It will emphasize the good things in high school sports. And I think that's something that will rise out of this.
Any other questions from the media? Yep, Justin.
Talked about winter, we talked about spring. But if you watch the news, we've heard the terms July, August tossed about. You mentioned, I think, that you've been talking about football. Can you shed any light on those at least preliminary talks regarding football, volleyball, soccer come fall?
I will say this, and I'll openly say it. We haven't discussed the fall yet. But I think, again, every one of us and every one of the individuals watching this understand how rapidly moving and fluid this whole situation has been. People, I mentioned what the governor recommended to me last Tuesday, and everything that transpired from Tuesday to Friday was incredible, not only here, but across the nation. So I guarantee you it's now on our radar to start looking at the what ifs. I've always said, our staff probably hears me say it way too often, of we hope for the best and plan for the worst. And we're pretty good. I think people pride themselves here internally of having plans in place. So we'll start looking.
Well, we'd like to thank everyone for coming today and also watching online. Jerry, could you give just a quick wrap-up comment?
Yes, and again, I do emphasize the fact that this is emotional for everyone. This is our life too. This is what we do every single day, is work for our kids. And I think people forget that sometimes. I've emphasized, I've been very fortunate over the last several weeks to speak at leadership conferences across the state of different leagues. Had I known at that time that we faced this, how much more important and content-wise those leadership conferences would have been. But at the same time, I've had many students reach out from those leadership conferences to me and even have mentioned, boy, what an important factor, what an important topic, how great these leadership conferences have been to put us, meaning students, on the forefront of being leaders with our own kids in our school. So again, everything's emotional, but we have to, as the governor said, it's here, and we have to fight the war, and we will do that.
Well, we'll hang around here for a little bit. We will clear the building here in a little bit, but you do have time to stay and work for a little bit. But again, if you have any sports-specific questions, Roxanne has tennis, Bo has lacrosse and football, Lauren has softball, and Dale has track. And I just thank everyone for coming. Thank you, especially for those watching at home as well.
Thank you. And yes, please feel free to reach out to anybody here.